I started playing piano here, and I started lessons with a local teacher who's dead now, but she would have been really well known and active in the community, Anna Egan. She was really well loved and respected. Tiny towns, church choir, she did everything. She taught every child in the parish piano as well, so she knew everyone, and she was a great character. And later on as a teenager, when I became more serious about piano and I started doing fesciol and those competitions and things, when that started going well for me, that's when I started developing a relationship with Boyle, because as a young, well, I'm not saying I'm not young now, but as a younger person, and hopefully I just stay young forever. As a younger person, I used to play the lunchtime concerts. I did that a few times here at Boyle Arts Festival, and they were kind of my first professional recitals. And Boyle Arts Festival has been really good to me like that over the years, as in they've asked me back a few times to play, which has been lovely, and I always love playing here because the room is nice. The audience is always really nice, really friendly, really warm, and of course the piano is really nice. So I always look forward to playing here. And after putting on my own project here last year, Roscommon Chamber Music Festival, that sounds like a plug, I wasn't aiming to get a plug in. But after doing that last year, Rona McGrath, the arts officer from Roscommon County Council, asked if I'd like to play for this project this year for the King House Piano Commission, and this is the third year of the King House Piano Commission. And I mean, I was just delighted to do it. Be a privilege to be able to play new music and be involved in the process of creating something new. And actually, I really like the pieces and think these are pieces that will get played again. So I just feel lucky to have been part of the project, really. The three pieces are really different. Each composer has their own different style. Also the pieces are interesting, like Fiona's piece, Mrs. Cousins, has the tape, so I need to practice with the tape just to make sure I'm lining up with the text and I get it timed right. Although she made it really easy for me because she played the tape for me today, so I didn't have to worry about, do I need to press the tape now or later? Or like in Bianca's piece, I have to use e-bows, which I've never used before, and if you don't know what e-bows are, I don't know what they are. How would I describe them? They're like little blocks you fasten to a guitar fretboard and they vibrate, so they make the strings vibrate. So she wrote a piece that uses them really differently, where I put them inside the piano on the strings and they vibrate freely on the strings. So when I lift the pedal, whatever string they're on hums and has a really cool mystical sound effect. So yeah, you just have to read the pieces and think, right, I wonder what they were trying to imagine when they wrote this. Thankfully, the text actually makes it easier, The
name of my composition is The Last Flame, and this was a commission from Roscommon County Council. The piece is a response to a text written by a local historian and watchmaker, Richard McGee. And Richard was a witness to the fire that destroyed Rockingham House in 1957. So compositionally, I think when you write a piece of music like this that responds to a text without actually including the text, I think it's important that you write something that enhances the text itself but isn't sort of slavishly reliant on the text in order to make sense as a piece of music. So this is something the great Canadian pianist Glenn Gould used to talk about with regard to Richard Strauss's music, these great symphonic tone poems, which were so elaborate and in which every musical gesture was representative of a textual moment as well, but yet they still stand up as great pieces of music in themselves. So that's very much what I was aspiring to. I don't know if I've kind of got that, but that was the goal at least. And then compositionally, I've tried to sort of use this little homage to Richard in this little four-note motif that kind of tips its cap to the Westminster chimes. So that will sort of appear again and again in sort of modified form in the piece itself. I was certainly looking for texts that felt musically, that would resonate musically, something that would have a kind of a strong musical connection. So in this, there's a sense of a journey through the night, and a fire and destruction, and then nostalgia, and all these things felt like they had musical kind of analogues that I was really trying to explore, so that was the starting point, the sort of emotional flow of the piece first, and then it was sort of just literally sitting at the piano and feeling my way to those sorts of sounds and those sorts of atmospheres, with this kind of idea of a little 4-note motif that kind of came through the music all the time in some way or another. Weeks where material just seems to sort of rebel against you a little bit, or you get stuck, and then you realize, actually, I really hadn't finished saying what I thought I was saying earlier on, and actually need to go back to this, and this material needs more space actually to finish saying what it's saying, kind of thing. And then eventually, and then sometimes you listen back and you think, well, actually, I think I've given it too much space there. I need to pull it in and then introduce something else, or introduce a variation of some sort. And but I suppose I always had that overall sort of 3-part structure in mind, because I think the text has a 3-part structure as well. So, I was very open to Peter modifying things, and even if things sat awkwardly under his hands, that if he wanted to sort of make a suggestion, but he is so in control, and nothing was too difficult for him or sat awkwardly. I suppose the fact that I'm a piano player as well meant that I could physically test things at the instrument too. So I was able to send him videos. There are like unusual techniques in my piece where you stroke the strings and do unusual things like that. So I was able to video myself doing those techniques and then sort of send that to him. So he had a very good idea of what I wanted. So that was really, really good then, and I've heard him play it through now, and I think he's got it just right,
Unforgettable Fire, I Was There, by Richard Mickey. I was the last person to stand in Rockingham House, and the last to see the beautiful main hall with the white marbled staircase in 1957. Just a few hours before the house was gutted, I was sitting in the Abbey Cinema Boyle enjoying a good film when the local fire siren alerted the Boyle Fire Unit. Afterwards, while chatting outside the cinema with the late Bernie Craig of Ballymore, the Castlereagh Fire Unit passed down the town. Bernie said the fire was in Rockingham, and we agreed that it must be a big one with the need for outside units. We knew the estate gate could be closed to all but firefighters, so as Bernie had his motorbike on the Crescent, I invited him to take me to Bailey Bridge where my boat and engine was housed. He thought it was mad to attempt a lake journey in the dark to see a fire that might be quenched even before we got there. However, off we went, with me holding on to him for dear life as we roared away on the bike. It was approaching 11 p.m. and was dark, but looking from John Coleman's house, where my engine was, no sign of the slightest fire glow from Rockingham could be seen. Still, we headed downriver to the river's mouth, past Gull Island, across the Devil's Half Acre and into Rockingham Bay. The huge house was silhouetted against the southern sky without any lights showing, and gave me the impression it was a burnt-out shell. We could hear the sound of the fire brigade pump from the harbour area, and headed the boat in that direction. Josie Tute, pumpman of the Boyle unit, greeted us as we moored and told us there was a serious fire in the lower regions of the house, and the combined units were having trouble getting water from the lake because of the distance and the shrubbery. The water hydrant fittings of the house were obsolete and wouldn't fit modern standpipes. He doubted if they could contain the fire or save the house. As we raced up the hill, we could smell smoke, but couldn't see any trace of fire. Firemen were trying to lay hose through the trees, while the Boyle captain, Pat Spellman, organised the removal of furniture from the ground floor. At that time, the fire seemed to be in the basement, so Rockingham Herald editor Michael O'Callaghan and I agreed to go through the underground garage and find the centre of the blaze. We crawled under the layer of smoke, located the blaze and reported back to Pat Spellman. By then the hoses could be laid, and the water pressure switched on. Unbeknown to everyone, the fire must have burned its way through an old dumbwaiter door and crept up to the first floor. There was still no sign of flames on the ground floor, where we all carried everything portable to safety outside. Estate workers and many people from the town and surrounding areas came to help. Suddenly, someone spotted a small flicker of light in an upstairs window, and in a few minutes, a room burst into flames. I don't recall how long it took the flames to spread, but they seemed like seconds, and those of us who were shifting big items of furniture from the ground floor had firelight from above, shining through the glass roof over the main hall. Underneath the glass roof in the hall stood a large glass press with the largest dinner service I've ever seen. The press was locked, and Pat Spellman thought it was shame to smash the glass doors, but with the new fire upstairs, he managed to prise open the lock, and we carried the press contents to safety. All this happened so quickly, and only a short while before it looked as if the fire below was under control and had been decided to leave back some of the furniture. When the fire above broke out, firemen changed their positions, and the helpers worked with greater speed. I remember helping to get a grand piano on its side so it could fit through the doors. Fireman Cormac Gallagher from Boyle helped me onto a mantelpiece to cut down a large painting. I used his pocket knife to try cutting what looked like rope, but found the rope was a small wire hawser. With Cormac's axe, I smashed off the top of the frame and we carried the painting outside. At that point, the fire above was completely out of control, with flames roaring from the doors at the top of the two branches of the marble stairs. Water was pouring from above, and the glass roof was disintegrating with fierce heat. Outside, lead was dripping down the wall, and the glass windows seemed to soften and partly melt before dropping to the ground. We were taking out the last few items when I saw two firemen up the main part of the marble stairs trying to move the large grandfather clock from its alcove. But because of its size, weight, and the water on the smooth surface, they failed to even lift it. I shouted at them to leave it to me, and they left in disgust, I'm sure, when they looked at me coming up to do what their combined strength failed to do. They didn't know that I was a watchmaker and was quite used to taking the clock asunder into easily transportable portions. With the light of the fire above me, there was more than enough brightness to take the clock apart and make 5 journeys outside with the 6 of the sections. All that was left was the large lower trunk of the case, and when I went in to retrieve it, I didn't realise that the fire chief had cleared everyone from the building. No one saw me upstairs at the clock case. Garda Tony Conlon was posted outside the front door to prevent anyone going inside. The building had been declared dangerous. The first I knew of this was when I came to the door with the clock case on my back and shouted beep beep at the Garda. He moved to let me pass and told me of the narrow escape that I'd had. That is how I found out that I was the last person to walk down the stairs, through the main hall and out the front door. My last memory of the interior is a roar of fire, water pouring through cracks in the ceilings and dribbling down the stairs, practically no smoke, and the flames from overhead turning the marble a pink shade. There was a glass spilling from the hall roof, minor explosions from the upper floors, and heavy objects falling on floors. No fire on the ground floor, but a blood colour on the outside of the front door from the flames upstairs reflecting from the hall glass case. Rockingham House was doomed, even though the fire units continued to pour water on the inferno. Michael O'Callaghan told me he wanted to send a report to Radio Éireann, now RTE, and knew I could get him a book with some details of the house. So he drove me into Boyle, where I got the book, and we went to his home and phoned. While Michael wrote the news report and phoned it to Dublin, his wife Nellie made tea and sandwiches for us. We drove out again to Rockingham, which had the sky glowing with great tongues leaping from the dome of roof. The fire was still spreading through the top floor rooms, creating a firestorm. The heat was so great that everyone had to stand very far away, and the ceilings were falling down inside, sending showers of sparks hundreds of feet into the sky. My travelling companion, Bernie, and my boat and engine still had to cross the lake to the Bailey Bridge, so we decided to leave, and as we passed opposite McDermott's Castle Island, we could easily read the small print on the Abbey Cinema programme by the light of the burning house. On reaching our destination, we decided to take one last look at the great house, and with the boat and engine locked up, we hopped up on Bernie's bike and headed through the estate to see the end of Rockingham. As we approached from the beach walk, the roof collapsed, smashing through the 2 upper floors, sending sparks and burning fragments over the lawns. Oddly, the glass orangery on the east side of the house was still intact, without a single pane of glass broken. I heard a clock striking, and the high-pitched brass bell sounding above the terrible fire sound. My curiosity was rewarded by finding an American striking clock lying on its back on the front lawn, evidently saved from the house and temporarily abandoned, with striking mechanism continuously ringing the death knell. Beside it were some books, one of which the pages were turning quickly to fire in the wind. I looked at it and found it was Father Sharkey's Heart of Ireland. It was dawn and still the fires burned. Firemen still hosed down the remains while the state workers carried away the meagre amount of furnishings saved. Spectators left for home, as did Bernie and myself. I returned later that afternoon and found fireman Cormac Gallagher still working. He called me saying, "Do you want to see the last flame of Rockingham?" Sure enough, there was still a small blaze burning at the main front door, and I watched Cormac turn his hose on the very last flame. Some days later, the rubble inside the house was still too hot to stand on for more than a minute. The charred remains of the great front door still hung, and the entrance hall was a blackened mess with its ornate ceiling in dust on the floor. The once beautiful top-lighted single-storey central hall with its coved ceiling and modillion cornice was peeled of its grandeur by the fire, stripped bare of all ornament, including the Corinthian columns between the hall and the imperial white marble staircase. There was a pile of rubble made up of bricks, slates, burned timber, and steps of 2 curved upper stair flights which had snapped off of the sidewalls, crashing below, with the ornate iron balustrade that now lay covering the central staircase. Gaping roof and windows, bare brickwork, electrical conduit, water pipes and radiators clinging from above. The massive steel girders that supported the walls and floors were twisted and bent. Not one book or record page from the library remained. All rooms and apartments were destroyed, but a wall safe very high up was visible, and a bathtub beside a broken window had survived. The interior of the great house was unrecognisable and beyond repair. It was the end of an era. Rockingham was gone forever. All that remained was an empty shell, still radiating heat from a fire that finished several centuries of local history.
Mrs. Cousins née Gillespie. My piece was inspired by a Boyle woman, Margaret Cousins, who was born in 1878 in Boyle in County Roscommon. And she became a musician, a suffragette, a vegetarian, a campaigner. She travelled to India to fight for their independence, as well as fighting for Irish independence as well. I came across a book that she and her husband James Cousins wrote together called We Two Together, which is this huge autobiography detailing all their adventures from Boyle to Dublin to London and then over finally to India, where they spent the rest of their days. And it's a wonderful first-hand account of the different adventures they had, but also the very interesting times that they were living through, not just Irish independence, but Indian independence as well. But as I was looking at this book, what really struck me was that a common theme throughout was music, and was the fact that she was a concert-level pianist. So Margaret Cousins studied music up in Dublin, and she talks about that a lot in the book, about how, you know, she loved the freedom and the excitement of Dublin, and they would have made friends with the likes of the Sheehy Skeffingtons, and would have been involved in a lot of the politics of the time as well. But music is constantly a theme, and one of the most interesting stories from Margaret Cousins' life is the fact that she's credited with being the first person to have committed the Indian national anthem to Western notation, and that helped its dissemination throughout India. And the story of when that happened is actually in the book, and that kind of features as the climactic point of my piece. So the piano, she was a concert-level pianist, and the piano is a running theme throughout her life. So an awful lot of stories revolve around her either playing at the piano or talking about music. She talks at one stage about meeting a Polish composer and talking about Polish independence, and she says to him, as soon as I heard about the Polish independence, I ran and played some Chopin on the piano. And this idea of using piano playing as a form of celebration for her shows that it was really part of her life all the way through. There's one part of my piece where she talks about that she didn't expect to find a piano in Darjeeling, but passing a second-hand shop one day, they found one, so it was carted off up to the house, and she hadn't brought any notated music with her, so she just tried to remember all of the pieces that she knew and tried to play them, and I think she said it took her about 2 weeks to get through her entire remembered repertoire. Another story was from when she was in prison. I think it was maybe the second time she was in prison, and she was in prison in India, and she didn't have any piano with her, but she found a copy of a Scriabin piece in her case, so she started practicing on the table fit at the end of her bed. So she put the music in front of her and imagined it, and she talks about how that the music existed only in her imagination, which maybe is where it belongs anyway. So I used all of these themes, and my piece has the piano part, but it also has a tape part where I asked two voice artists to record the parts of Margaret Cousins and the part of James Cousins. So that was Shirley Keane and my brother Colm Lennon, because there's no existing recordings of either of them. There's no recordings of their voices. So that was a very interesting process, just listening to recordings from the time to try and assess what their accents might have been like, how might they have spoken. So there was a lot of research done on their part, and they came back with these recordings of fragments from the book. And then when I was composing the piano part, because the piano plays such a huge part in her life, I wanted, and obviously that these piano pieces are being composed for this piano, which has spurred so many new commissions this year and in the past, I wanted the piano to be very much at the centre of it. So you'll hear a drone on the tape part, which is actually the strings, the inside of the strings of the piano being played with another string put at 90 degrees. So it's this kind of humming sound. So the strings of the piano are used. In the middle of the piece, Peter also gets up and starts playing the inside of the piano, just plucking them. He also plays on the fall board, so the part of the piano that folds over the keys when it's closed. He plays on that as well for one section. So it was this idea of using the piano in as many ways as we could. Also, a little fun fact, my piece uses every key on the piano. So every single key is played at some point in the piece.
Every afternoon, and wherever made it around the world, and did what we want. Remembered repertoire, all the world with Irish women, particularly against volunteered to break the windows of Dublin Castle, the official seat of English domination. Like the sound of breaking glass on January 28, 1913, will forever rage around the world. Irish women protested against this practice of undemocratic responsibility. Sonata Fantasy No. 2 in G sharp minor in my trunk. See me then after lockup, by the light of a Petrolax lamp hung up outside the bars of my cell door. Not inside. You never know what a prisoner might do with fire. Seated on a soapbox, playing on the edge of my cot, with the music cocked up against the wall, and enjoying myself hugely in the world of imaginary sound, which was perhaps its real world.
Came to the door, we suspended a hot potato game to make room for him on the floor in the centre of the crowd. We sang a chorus. I sang an Irish song with a hint that individual contributions to the extemporaneous programme were not excluded. After another chorus, Rabindranath asked if he might sing one of his Bengali songs. Leave was granted. In a voice surprisingly light for so large a man, he sang something like a piece of geography, giving a list of countries, mountains and rivers, and in a second verse a list of the religions of India. The refrain to the first verse made us prick up our ears. The refrain to the second verse made us clear our throats. We asked for it again and again and again, and before long we were singing it with gusto. Jaya Hai, Jaya Hai, Jaya Hai, victory, victory, victory to thee. We had no idea of who or what was to have the victory. Next day, Rabindranath gave the Swarms the notes of Bianca Gannon to Mrs. Cousins so that the melody should have accurate permanent record. He also made a translation of the song into English as the Morning Song of India. That night, under the peepal tree at the back of our home, he went over the song line by line in Bengali, with its English equivalent for understanding, until we could sing it with assurance. It took its place in the daily dedication of the combined school and college in the great Besant Hall, and through students and visitors was carried to the borders of India.
commission. The brief was to write a work for solo piano that is inspired by literature of the local area. So the literature that I chose was the mythological creation story of Loch Cé, beautiful lake here, and as transcribed or written by Lady Gregory. And the composition, the story starts with a battle of the druid Kay, and he is wounded and he goes through mountains and lands, and then he sees a beautiful plain, a beautiful wide open space filled with flowers, and taken with the beauty, I suppose, he perseveres, he's determined to make it there, and when he does, he dies, and then when he's buried, it explodes into the lake, Loch Cé as we know it today, or Loch Cé in Irish. And so some of the sounds that I used for that were syncopated chords on piano, nice big chords for the mountains, and then some e-bows, electronic bows typically used for electric guitars, but sound beautiful on piano strings to create a very spacious, meditative, wide open plain, and as well as some finger plucking on the strings and the lid shutting when he dies, and some other techniques to create the story of how the local lake got its name. Every piano is different. I did know the model of this piano, so I could work out the placement of the e-bows on the piano strings, but once we went to play it in real life, one of them wouldn't resonate because I think the strings were too short, so then we had to move it to another note, which sounds simple, except you can't play a semitone above or below, so then it changed everything, and it took us a long time to find a note that worked in the harmony that wouldn't rattle when all of the other notes were played, so but we got there. I don't often have the opportunity to use grand pianos. I mean, at home, I just have an upright, but I like to play between meditative sounds, like that can be quite drones, I suppose, and then sort of juxtaposing it with something quite rhythmic, something quite syncopated and grooving, with a groove, but also when I say meditative, it could also be that the rapid syncopations, that could be the trance as well. So but I like to create those contrasts, and I guess those are the sound worlds that I like, a little bit otherworldly as well. I guess that's what drew me to the text as well, being mythological, so being a little bit otherworldly. And Kay, the druid of Nuada of the Silverhead, was wounded in the battle, and he went southward till he came to Carncoursleba. And there he sat down to rest, tired with the wounds and with the fear that was on him and the journey. And he saw a smooth plain before him, and it full of flowers, and a great desire came on him to reach to that plain. And he went on till he came to it, and there he died. And when his grave was made there, a lake burst out over it, over the whole plain, and it was given the name Loch Cé.